What's happening, everyone? My partner's Ian's keeping it real. What's happening, everyone, and welcome to El Chile Boxing Talk. Got the homies Nopal and Run PMC with me. Sean Gringo Hicks is not here this week, but he's got some great notes for us that we're going to share with you guys a little bit later. And then I want to give a shout out to the Don and JC up in the house early. So welcome, guys. So let's get to our first topic, man. I feel like, after our last show ended, it's been all the news. Canelo versus Charlo. But some people are coming out saying that this might be fake news. So I wanted to talk to Nopal about this. He's always had a handle on how Canelo negotiations go. But before that, I just want to show a little bit about what we've seen on Twitter. This is what Eddie Reynoso has to say about the negotiations. He says, "Good afternoon. Regarding the next fight of Canelo, there is no negotiation with any promoter or rival or date. Next week, we will have something concrete." And then he says, "Saludos." And then on top of that, too, B from Ringside Report, he's got a source. And he says that the source says he doesn't think that there will be a fight between Charlo and Canelo because Charlo doesn't have anything to offer. And I don't think Heyman will guarantee more than $40 million to Canelo. So they're looking to make Makabu, Bivol, or Smith. And that's the source. Shout out to Ringside Reporter and Beeb. But I want to hear what Nopal has to say about this to kind of get us acquainted with how negotiations work with Canelo. Nopal, tell us what you think about all this, man.
Well, it's very typical. I mean, if we take it back to the Triple G negotiations a long time ago, what was it, like 4 years ago or something? You can see a big example of them putting all their eggs in one basket. In that particular circumstance, you see that, when they wanted to get that fight, that's the only fight that they wanted to get, and they weren't trying to negotiate with nobody else, and they made a big mistake right there. I think they learned from the mistake. The reason why I say it was a big mistake is because when they let Triple G know that that's the only fight they wanted to make, and that allowed Triple G a lot of momentum and juice to try to negotiate whatever purse he wanted. And in the long run, it didn't go well for them, but they did win the fight or whatever. And I'm talking about the rematch. They did win the fight, but I think they learned from that mistake. And what they started doing going forward is rather than focusing on one opponent, they always have a list of opponents that they're willing to fight. And, and they put them all, like, say they got 4 opponents typically, and they'll ask each one, you know what I mean? They'll send them all contracts, and this is what we're offering you. And that's why a lot of the time we hear, hey, he wants to fight this guy, he wants to fight this guy. Now they will release the name of the guy. They will be rumors of whoever he wants to fight, but that's what they do all the time now is they have a list of guys they want to fight, and that allows them leverage to always tell the one opponent when they try to price themselves out, well, you're just one of 4 or 5 opponents that we're willing to fight right now and that we're offering contracts to. So, if you don't take this fight, we're fighting this guy. So no big deal. That allows them that rather than letting them know, well, you're the only guy we want to fight. And, we're willing to offer you this. I mean, that just gives the opponent way too much leverage where the opponent will be like, well, the only way I'll fight you is 15 million and you guys are only offering 12. So, and then in the long run, you'll see them budging into whatever the demands of the opponent are. So I think, like I said, they learned from their mistakes of just putting all their eggs in one basket. And this is how they negotiate with people going forward. And I got to say, I mean, it's a good move because with Makabu, the thing with that fight is they don't have to pay him the same amount that they do a different opponent like Charlo or Plant. These guys are getting 10 million plus. They don't have to pay Makabu that much because I don't think he's ever made $1 million ever in his career. So this is basically negotiation wise. Makabu's kind of like he's got as much juice probably as Rocky Fielding did. So they don't have to pay him 10 million. They can pay him about 3 million. 3 or 4 million would be a very generous pay for Makabu, because he, like I said, I don't think he's ever made 1 million. And not only that, that fight would probably sell almost as much as a Charlo fight, even though there's a lot of people won't agree with this, but there's a lot of the thing with this fight is the Charlo fight, there's a lot of people that want to see that fight, and Americans and everything, but the thing with the Makabu fight is it's almost like a circus fight, and it has that attraction, kind of like the Jake Paul fights, like the Floyd Mayweather fights, the recent ones that they've been doing. It's like a circus fight, and that'll attract more casuals than the Charlo fight, in my opinion. And the thing with that fight, like I said, they don't have to pay Makabu that much, so there's off the bat, Canelo's going to get a larger purse because he doesn't have to share that much with Makabu. It's just going to be like a 10% split, maybe Makabu's way, and whereas the Charlo split has to be it's probably going to be at least 20% of the purse. Not to mention Charlo's asking for more money. He's pricing himself out. So, in this situation, like I said, I think he'll make more with Makabu. So that's good leverage when Canelo's negotiating. He's like, hey, bro, the sky's the limit with this fight with Makabu. So, I'm pretty sure that that's a good angle. Even Charlo's advisors could be like, hey, man, I mean, you can barely make you should just take the offer, because if what's Charlo's other option is fighting versus Plant, and I think that he's not favored to win that either. So he's in his first fight of his whole career, he's gonna not be favored to win a fight, and what's he gonna do? Ruin his Canelo chance just to fight Plant and potentially lose, even though Plant's coming off of a loss? There's a lot of things to consider on this one.
Damn, that was good stuff. From now on, we're going to talk the business, and it's in regards to Canelo. We're taking it straight to no Paul, man. Run PMC, you got anything on this? What are your thoughts?
I'd much rather see the Charlo fight. I mean, I don't think Makabu's much of an opponent or deserves a fight. If we talk about people who deserve a fight, I don't think it's Makabu. So, and I still think, I mean, I don't think anyone knows Makabu. And I think this would be, if you look at it, like, it's more of just trying to build on a legacy, but I think it's sort of false, because I don't think that's just belt grabbing is the thing. It's like when Floyd went up and fought Cotto, and it's like when Pacquiao went up and fought Margarito. Like, you look back on it, it's like not as big of a, I mean, it adds to their resume, but it's not actually a good, I mean, they ended up being decent fights, but I just don't think it would add that much to Canelo's legacy outside of just people that look back in the record books without any context. So I would rather see the Charlo fight. I don't really care what such and such gets paid, or whatever fighter gets paid what. I just would rather see that fight.
No, I hear you there. And Sean wanted to chime in right here, and he says that he's disappointed that Canelo is rewarding yet another fighter who hasn't earned it with the opposition they faced. But Charlo is a name. So I think that's an interesting comment. Like, if you were to ask me, I would say that Charlo historically hasn't really done anything to warrant being in front of the line. But he's definitely an option, because I don't think anybody deserves to be in front of the line against Canelo. So, man, I think this is one heck of an interesting fight. And Nopal, you were breaking it down. So what you're saying, Nopal, is that you think it's time that Jermall Charlo's handlers cash him out. Like, right now is the time, because he really can't go anywhere else without taking a big risk. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that negotiation-wise, right now is the time, because unless he's going to keep fighting no-hopers like he's done most of the time, I think around the first time that he stepped up to K9 Bundridge and stopped fighting like 8-round fights, Canelo was already probably going into 160 to do the Triple G thing. So what I'm saying is his career has just been like that, basically. I don't think he's ever fought an undefeated fighter ever in his career. I don't think he's done any of those things. So, right now is the time, because if he, because pretty soon, I mean, fans are up and down with Charlo. for 3 years straight, they were using him as a pawn to try to discredit Canelo in a sort of way. So he was basically just a tool for a while, and right now is the time that they get to prove that that he's worthy of this fight. And I think right now is the time, definitely, because if he takes a risk, he can potentially lose. And if he loses his undefeated record, basically he can kiss that fight goodbye versus Canelo. That's the simple truth. And can he lose his O? Of course he can. You know what I mean? Like I said, that if he fights Plant, I don't think that that's a guaranteed win for him. I think that it's a heavy risk. There's a lot of things that Plant can do better than Charlo. You know, um, I think right now's the time. Right now's the only time, unless he's gonna just the, keep fighting the no hopers. And how many no hopers are there left out there for him to fight?
Hey, man, that's a good call. And dude, you know what? Jermall Charlo's talking like that fight's a possibility. Also, if you check out War Week Radio, Ronnie Shields talking like they have their bid in, and I do know that Eddie Hearn said at the beginning of the year he was going to make his bids. So I also think that there's some negotiations going down. And I want to give a shout out to Rider of the Storm. Remy's in the house, and JC looks like he's back. Glad to have you guys here, man. And yeah, dude, these are some interest, and Team Batman Boxing, of course. But yeah, these are some interesting considerations. You know what? And I'll tell you, this is the fight that I've always wanted. I've always wanted to see Canelo versus Jermall Charlo. I've always said, like, Jermall Charlo doesn't necessarily need to be the next in line. And I've never thought that Canelo was ducking Jermall Charlo. Another one of the things that we've investigated back in the day and that the Canelo cartel should get credit for is that we were beating that drum early, saying that, hey, dude, Jermall Charlo's already received an offer a while back on G Funky's channel. They had one of the Golden Boy, I forget who it was, but it was like a Golden Boy matchmaker. And G Funky asked him, hey, there's this rumor going around that you made Jermall Charlo an offer for May of 2019. Is that true? And he confirmed. And that tweet, even though it was like a few months back, right now it's getting a lot of action. So people are retweeting it right now. There's a lot of buzz for this particular fight. And I could see why. Like, I've always kind of wanted this fight and I'm looking forward to it. But, like some people think that, perhaps Jermall Charlo's kind of like not worthy of this fight. And then here's the other comment that Gringo has to say. He says, I hope the rumors are true on Canelo versus Charlo, as it's a big fight, but I don't think Charlo has a chance to win. So we're going to break this fight down later on if it does indeed happen. What I want to know what you guys think. Like, does he have a chance to win? Like, what are your thoughts on Charlo's actual chances towards winning this fight? Ron, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, everyone has a shot when they go in there, and I mean, regardless of, not to totally discount his last performances, but Jermall Charlo is still a good boxer. He's not like just some scrub off the street. So I still do think he has a chance. I don't know, percentage wise, I definitely would favor Canelo in the fight, especially at 168. But yeah, I don't think it's like, I think he possibly might get into more exchanges with Canelo and make it possibly more exciting than Caleb Plant, because I think Charlo has a good shot against Caleb Plant, even if moving up. But I think it would be a good fight. That's why I'd want to see it over the Makabu fight. And then just to touch on, I think what we were talking about a few minutes ago about like when Jermall Charlo and like the undefeated fighters. I think if I'm correct, Julian Williams. I mean, you've seen sort of how his career's gone now, but he was an undefeated fighter when Jermall Charlo fought him. I think his only loss, or not loss, excuse me, his only draw was when him and Hugo Centeno fought on one of those Friday night cards before. I think it was a May or September date for one of Floyd's fights, if I'm remembering it correctly. But then also when around that time, Canelo was just coming off the Khan fight and then went into the Smith and Chavez fights too. So just to lay out some context, but I think it's a good fight. I would like to see it over, like, what I would really want to see is Canelo go to 175 and fight those guys who they seem to be freeing up this during like middle to end of the year. So if he fights Charlo now and moves up to 175, that's what I want. I think like leave Makabu alone. That's not no one asked for that fight. It's like that meme where like people are like saying like it's like nobody and then it says something after it. That's sort of how I feel about the Makabu fight. But I mean, either way, I'll watch the Canelo fight, but I just would want to see him fight, I think, legitimate opponents, not like to play down anyone's career, boxing career, but I just think if we're talking about like who deserves fights, I think Charlo being closer to the weight class and then just being more well known would deserve the fight more than Makabu.
I think it's a great fight, bro. I mean, we
Yeah.
just got to face it at this point in Canelo's career. This is all that's left. These kind of fights, you know what I mean? That fights that we've been asking for. I mean, when you put their records side by side, you might necessarily not feel like, Charlo has a chance, but he is black and he is very athletic, so he's got to have a great chance, and he's got a great jab. A lot of people say he's got the best jab in boxing. He's got decent footwork. He's got a good chin, is what I hear a lot of people say, and he's got a great trainer too. So he does have a chance. You know what I mean? It reminds me sort of when Shane Mosley fought De La Hoya. A lot of people just thought that De La Hoya was going to win that, and Shane Mosley was coming up off of 2 division. It was a 2-division jump, from lightweight to welterweight, I believe. And of course he has a chance. I mean, he might just shock the world, just like Shane Mosley did. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then even like not Shane Mosley, like Vernon Forrest, when he fought Ricardo Mayorga, and no one in their right mind at the time would have thought Ricardo Mayorga would beat Vernon Forrest twice. Like I mean, I'm sure there were some people, but like at the time, conventional wisdom would have told you otherwise. That's why we need to have the fights so we can see them, not just spepeculate, right?
That's for sure. And I've always wanted to see this fight in particular, and I agree with your breakdowns of both of Jermall Charlo. Like, I'll tell you, I do think he's got great fundamentals. I've always said that Jermall Charlo, especially when he's doing what he wants to do and he's not receiving too much pressure, like he can really get off. Like you said, Nopal, he's got a really good jab, great cross, good uppercuts, hooks. He works the body well. His defense is decent. I think his footwork is decent, but I think it's a little bit limited, and I think that's going to be one of the problems about this particular fight. One of the things is like, I was asking myself, okay, like you said, also Nopal, he's athletic. What can we compare, like, as far as his style, like what can we compare it to as far as Canelo's past fights? And I think the most recent one would be Danny Jacobs. I think that you could do a lot of comparisons. I think they are probably similar in height and in reach. And I think that that was a pretty close fight. Like, I had Canelo clearly winning, but I remember thinking that Jacobs definitely won some rounds. And I think Canelo definitely respected Jacobs, but I also think Jacobs had very good ring IQ in there. He was also doing some really good work. He was fully prepared for that fight, in my opinion. I don't know if Jermall Charlo has that type of ring IQ. I've just never seen him need to make adjustments. Like, it seems to me, and I've said this before, one of the things about Canelo is he's really good at applying the pressure these days. And Jermall Charlo, he can't move laterally on the back foot very well, in my opinion. I think he's a front foot fighter. When he is under pressure, the only thing he could do is power his way through. And that's what makes this a good fight, but he's not going to be able to move around as much. And so, like, he's going to have to try to power his way through Canelo, and that's what I think makes this fight interesting, and that's why I think there will be some fireworks early in this fight. And I'll tell you this, dude. Sorry, go ahead, Nopal.
This fight's been brewing, bro. There's so many elements to this fight, man. So many angles that can be used from both sides. And it's been brewing for a long time, mostly because, the fan bases have been crying for this fight forever. And, I think it's time for one of these two guys to get their ticket punched, basically. And, the fan bases are lusting for blood on this one, so it's got potential. This fight has potential from every aspect, it's going to sell 1 million pay-per-views, that's for sure, and both guys are going to get paid like a mug, bro, for sure.
Oh, yeah. And the last part that I wanted to highlight about what Sean had to say about this particular segment, he says, I don't think Charlo has a chance to win. And that's something that I think is interesting because we talk about how good Jermall is, but, the one thing that we'll be able to get into as the weeks go by is how good Saul Canelo Alvarez is. This guy's the man, and he's been leaving a trail of destruction everywhere he goes. right? So, I mean, I could see why a person wouldn't be excited about their fighter, even if they really like them, getting a shot against Canelo. And so I wanted to ask you guys what you thought. Like, it made me think like, okay, I want you guys to think about a time where you really liked a fighter and he was going to go up against a fighter that you thought he had no chance against. Does anybody come to mind?
The one off the bat that I enjoyed watching as a fighter would be James Kirkland when he fought Canelo Alvarez. I didn't think, even though I enjoyed watching Kirkland's career, and he definitely had the breaks in his career that definitely affected him. It was not the same fighter without and Wolf in his corner or in his training camp. When he went to the Canelo fight, I knew there was no shot at him winning that fight. So that's the one I think of off the bat. Also, I think going into when Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao fought, I always thought Floyd would win the fight, and I thought it would have been he would have done a better job if they fought back in 2009, because I just think Manny Pacquiao, as we'll talk about here, as he grew older, he became wiser and more selective with his punches. I think we would have seen a Floyd stoppage if we would have seen it in 2009, because I just think Manny was just too open. And then but then people counter with about when he fought Cotto, but it's like Cotto was weight drained and never fought. He never fought at 147, even though they fought at 143 for that fight. So I think that was more telling for that fight. But so it was really just, I think, Kirkland when he fought Canelo, and then Manny when they fought Floyd Mayweather in 2015. Those are the two that come to mind.
Damn it. Remy says the Kovalev fight, he thought Kovalev didn't have a chance. I'll tell you what, dude, I thought Kovalev stood a decent chance. Like, I was in Vegas for that fight, and I didn't put any money down, even though the odds weren't that bad, especially when you think about the odds these days for Canelo fights. Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant had like 8-1 underdog type status, 9-1. I mean, it was really bad. And I want to take a look at some odds for Floyd Mayweather against his opposition, because one of the things that I have to say is that I did think there were a couple fights that Floyd Mayweather was in where I thought, okay, the other guy's got no chance, and I liked them. And one that I want to highlight is the Juan Manuel Marquez fight. You can see that the odds were only negative 360. I remember when this fight went off, I remember telling my casual friends who were kind of getting into the 24/7s at the time. I think they were starting to get really popular. And I told them, like, don't let these 24/7s and Juan Manuel's, like, Marquez's, like, self-belief trick you into thinking that Marquez has a chance in this one. I knew he had no chance in that one. He wasn't going to go up 2 weight classes and beat Floyd Mayweather, regardless if Floyd Mayweather was just coming off a little bit of a break. Also, I felt that way against Robert Guerrero, who was a wider underdog, negative 600. So in that particular fight, I thought Guerrero had no chance, although at the time I was going to San Jose State right next to Gilroy. He was around my age, and, I really liked Robert the Ghost Guerrero. Also, Areola versus Vitaly Klitschko, like, I didn't think that Areola had that much of a chance, but I mean, I was still kind of hoping, but the rest of these fights, like, I could say that I did think that some of these guys had a chance. Like, I was more of a casual fan, but Ricky Hatton kind of was, he was somewhat of an underdog, right? 2-1, 2.5-1. I remember thinking Ricky Hatton had a little bit of a chance. Mosley, I talked myself, and like I said, I wasn't knowledgeable, and maybe I was a little bit more of a fanboy, but I talked myself into thinking that Mosley had a chance. I talked myself into thinking Ortiz had a chance. Cotto, yeah. And then, okay, Canelo. I thought Canelo had a chance. Like, at the time, I remember thinking, and this was, I was limited on my knowledge back then, but I remember thinking, okay, well, Floyd didn't look that great against Cotto. On top of that, if Guerrero can maybe hold his own a little bit, and maybe win a couple rounds, and Alvarez certainly has a chance. So I thought Canelo had a chance. And that's what I have to say. No, Paul, what do you think, man?
Just like Run, when I think about the situation, I always think about the same exact fight. And not only that fight, which was Kirkland versus Canelo, because I used to really be a big fan of Kirkland and also Angulo. I knew them guys didn't have a chance. And but they were 2 of my favorite fighters, and I actually wanted them to beat Canelo, but especially the Angulo fight. I mean, but I thought, I thought they didn't have a chance. And, the fight actually proved that I didn't know shit at all, because even though I knew they didn't have a chance, I still had a little bit of hope, but I was completely wrong with that little bit of hope. I should have known they were going to get completely messed up. And also, it reminds me of the Andy Reese fight. I didn't think he had any chance there either, versus Joshua. And on that one, it turned out I was wrong, because I didn't know it. I hadn't watched enough Andy Ruiz fights,
Hey, that's a good call. Thinking back on it, and I wasn't really like a huge Ruiz fan when the fight popped off, but so it wasn't a fighter that I really quote unquote liked. But yeah, I didn't think he had much of a chance either. But it is interesting how like when your favorite fighter goes up against somebody that you start talking yourself into how they can win. Like I haven't had to experience that in a while because Canelo's always game. So and on top of that, like I said, the last time I really had like, oh shit, I don't know about this one was the Triple G fight. I respected Jacobs, I respected Kovalev, I respected all these opponents that Canelo's gotten in the ring with since, but that was the one where I was a little bit nervous. The first Triple G fight, even the second one, man, like I was not so sure that Canelo was going to be able to win. I thought he had a chance, but that was like where I was nervous. But otherwise, I haven't had to deal with this in a while. Like, especially as I've become more of like just like a seasoned fan. Like I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but there's not too many results that surprised me. Like I can't think of a fighter that I've really liked where I thought, okay, they have no chance going in, and they did surprise me. Like for instance, like I like Valdez, right? But okay, if Valdez beat Shakur Stevenson, that would be an example for me. Like, I don't think he has much of a chance, in my opinion, against Shakur Stevenson. So that would surprise me. But other than that, like, not too many other like fights like that. Well, yeah, not too many fights that come to mind where I think, okay, this guy's really good and I like him, but there's this other guy around that would just dominate him. Like, there's not too many examples of that for me right now.
Yeah,
All right,
I
man.
can't think of any other modern or like present day boxing examples where trying to think some fights if you had like someone come up and fight Canelo, maybe like Tony Harrison or someone like that. But that's not really a fight that anyone's even asking about. So I mean, we could make them, but like, yeah, those are probably the two. I think another one possibly back in 2011, which is one of my fights I like to rewatch, is that I don't remember exactly how the boxing public felt about it, but when Victor Ortiz fought Andre Berto, he was in there to get washed by Andre Berto, so then Berto could fight Floyd Mayweather in the fall. But obviously proved otherwise, and that's like I said, one of my top two favorite fights to watch. So I think that one, and also James Kirkland versus Alfredo Angulo, which is also one of the fights I enjoyed watching. Is that Kirkland going into that one also wasn't really looked at. He was looked at. He fought three in a row back with Ann Wolf within 6 months after he lost to Ishida. So he was sort of put in there just to like get a name. He fought Julio, stopped him a few years before, and was looking just to springboard Angulo into the bigger picture at 154. So I think those two, but I can't really think about any like right now.
I hear you, man. But I do think Jermall Charlo has very little chance only because of the style matchup. Like, I do think that he could possibly go in there and possibly beat Billy Joe Saunders, possibly beat Plant. I think he has a chance, and I might favor him in those fights. Like, I'd have to actually break down some film. I would like either of those fights. I think he has a chance against Benavidez, but against Canelo, stylistically, I just don't think he has a chance at all. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about too is that, people are starting to have some angles about this fight. Like, we've been tracking this for years, and who knows, like Nopal and I might have our own little documentary about how we've been following this Canelo versus Charlo fight for a long time. But you can see that the Canelo haters are in a little bit of a pickle. They don't know whether to call Charlo a cherry pick to avoid embarrassment or to continue saying that Charlo would beat Canelo. And they're doing it to themselves. That's all I can say. And here's the other thing I want to say. The Canelo cartel will return in 2022. Nopal and myself decided to get it back together. And if this fight kicks off, you can bet that we're going to be there and we got some shit to say, and Gringo's our homie. And I know he's going to forgive us for what we have to say. He respects what we have to say and we respect him. Also, we like Charlo in a way, but man, we are going to enjoy the run up to this fight. So y'all can be on the lookout for that. And next, one of our favorite segments, Pacquiao versus Marquez. We went and scored number 1 and number 2. And I'll tell you, man, it was one hell of a thing. I really enjoyed this, dude. I watched the first one last week, watched the second one a couple days ago. But we're going to start with the first one. And to break it down for us, we got Run PMC. Run, please break it down for us.
Alrighty. Well, thank you all for accommodating, moving it for me, because I definitely wanted to rescore this one, or both of them, and then really want to talk about it. But so Pacquiao Marquez 1 took place May 8th, 2008, from the MGM Grand Garden Arena, Las Vegas, Nevada, which seemed to be a home really for Manny Pacquiao and Juan Manuel Marquez for basically the rest of their careers. And this was for Juan Manuel Marquez's WBA Super and IBF title belts, and then also Pacquiao coming off his late round stoppage of Marco Antonio Barrera held the Ring Magazine belt and the lineal featherweight title. So those are the two. They differentiated them at the time when I went back and did a little bit of research, which is interesting. I also looked back on the WBA. The WBA Super at this time, it didn't really seem like it was a commonly used belt. There was like Marquez, this was his second fight defending that belt, but it seemed like the regular WBA, which wasn't called the regular at the time, was just called the WBA, was holding a little more stock than it is today, which is definitely interesting. Seeing that's like 17 years ago, almost 17 years ago, and like how things have changed. And then also this was also a classic matchup between the trainers Freddie Roach versus Nacho Bernstein, and then Joe Cortez, who was really a staple referee and before his retirement a few years ago in Las Vegas. At the time, Bob Arum was the lead promoter, and then Murad Muhammad was Manny Pacquiao's promoter, and I believe Marquez was still with Zanfer Promotions and maybe in a co-role with Bob Arum, but it wasn't really clear. And then this was broadcast, funny enough, not on pay-per-view. It was on just HBO versus regular championship boxing. Miguel Cotto opened the fight with against Endu, I believe. And then this really was, some people might say, when you look back on it, like Pacquiao's really burst into superstardom. He had this fight a few years before, I think like 2 to 3 years before, against Lawaba, which everyone seems to credit that as his really springboard into fame, which maybe it did, but this fight coming right after the Barrera fight definitely springboarded Manny Pacquiao, and then definitely opened a lot of eyes to what he can bring, and also really gained Juan Manuel Marquez a lot of credit, because even they were talking about in the broadcast, Marquez up until this point was sort of looked at least from what HBO standpoint, looked at as sort of the third of the featherweights, excuse me, being Eric Morales and Barrera being the top of the top, and then going in this fight having Manny Pacquiao knocking off Marco Antonio Barrera. It was sort of Marquez was sort of the odd man out, if you will, and Pacquiao only fought Barrera 6 months before, and that was Barrera's really his peak of his career. He was coming off wins over Kevin Kelly, Johnny Tapia, Eric Morales, Nassim Hamed. So those were that was just really, I would say, in my opinion, if you were to look at Barrera's career, that was probably the peak and the pinnacle of his career. And then just for some other context for what was going on in boxing, the WBC champion at featherweight at this time was In Ji Chin, and WBO was Scott Harrison. And then this was a fight of the year candidate, but funny enough that the fight of the year that year ended up being Barrera Morales 3. And then another thing that might have gained these guys some more popularity was this fight was the weekend before Roy Jones Jr. Antonio Tarver 2, and we know exactly how that fight went with a second round knockout over Antonio Tarver over Roy Jones, and just probably one of the most shocking results I've seen in boxing since I started watching. I mean, we all know Jones didn't look good in his first fight, but to see the knockout of Antonio Tarver knocked him out in the way he did was really just the end of the Roy Jones era. And these guys were definitely already on the pound for pound list, but much lower. But I think it brought him back up. I think at the end of the year of 2004, they were both within the top 5 and 6, I believe. So definitely great fights. But how'd you guys have this first one scored?
Well, dude, I got to say, man, that first one was excellent. Great breakdown, Run PMC, lots of great context. Pretty interesting, man. Like, and I had a good time scoring this one. I'll tell you all this, dude. I actually went back, since it was slow and we stalled this for a week. I went back and watched all the fights. And I'm talking about the Pacquiao versus Morales, Pacquiao versus Barrera, Marquez versus Barrera. I watched them all, man, and so it was a great pleasure getting to this one. And, this one was interesting too, because, this was the one where Eric Morales said, hey, when he beat Pacquiao by decision, he said, I watched that Marquez Pacquiao 1 fight like 8 times. Right. So, I mean, and I was impressed with the ability that Morales had to actually kind of take some things from it, because Marquez has a really interesting style, and it's something that has evolved. And you could tell that it gets better between the first one and the second one. But, a lot of his principles are already there. Like, he's a well-seasoned dude for being 29 at this time, I believe, still in his 20s. We're all used to seeing Marquez older. But, I had Marquez and Pacquiao almost a draw. I had Pacquiao beating Marquez by 1 point. In this fight, to me, it looked like Marquez was not yet used to Pacquiao. Pacquiao had like a real wild style, and this was the Mexicutioner. And I'll tell you, man, like props to Marquez for coming back and legitimately winning a lot of rounds. But I think those initial 3 knockdowns in that first round was just a bit too much to overcome. I thought that Marquez was starting to offset Pacquiao's speed with great timing and counter skills in the third, but and also you could start telling how this is just such a great style clash. But I had Pacquiao beating Marquez 113 to 112. Nopal, how'd you have it, man?
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Stop there just a second, Chicano. You're not going to just tell us what you had, your scores or whatever. You got to tell us what rounds you had, bro. Which rounds did you have Pacquiao winning?
Oh, you know what, guys? I got to go. No, I'm just kidding. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'll tell you my rounds. I'm not scared. Shoot. I had Pacquiao winning the 1st and the 10th, and the 4th, which I classified as a swing round. The 7th was a swing round, and the 10th, or excuse me, and then round 12. But the swing rounds I had were round 4 and round 10. So you definitely could give this fight to Marquez. I think this fight could have gone either way, but I happened to score it for Pacquiao. I've watched this fight roughly to my memory. I think I've watched this fight probably like 5 or 6 times, and I think only once have I given it to Marquez. But this is the most amount of time that's gone by since I've rescored it, and also I'm much better at scoring fights. But I still had Pacquiao winning. But on another night watching it, I could have easily had given it to Marquez.
That sounds good. So you had rounds 1, 4, 10, and 12 for Pacquiao.
Yeah, and 2 as well.
Oh, okay. All right. So I scored this fight opposite to you, but the same score 113, 112 for Juan Manuel Marquez. Round 1 started off with a bang. I scored that round 10-6. Basically just went with the flow. That's what everybody else was scoring it. Round 2, I gave it to Pacquiao. Round 3, that's when Marquez started coming on a little bit. I gave round 3 to Marquez. Round 4, I gave it to Marquez. Round 5, Marquez. Round 6, Marquez. Round 7, I gave it to Pacquiao. I believe that's when Marquez started took that round off a little bit. Then comes back, round 8, gave it to Marquez. Round 9, I gave that to Marquez. Round 10, I gave that to Pacquiao. I think it was a pretty good round for him. By this point, by round 10, I started to see how biased Letterman is. He had it 96-91. And I think John Stewart, one of the judges, probably had the same thing. Round 11, I thought that was pretty clear Marcus round. Round 12, I think it was kind of even, but I managed to give that to Marquez. I scored the fight 113, 112. Again, Pacquiao rounds were round 1, 2, 7, and 10 for me. Run.
All right. Well, it sounds like we were pretty close in scoring. Like we didn't see too many differences, honestly. Run PMC, man. It seems like you're the tiebreaker today, bro. What did you think about this?
Definitely entertaining fight, but I think it was, at least for me, it seemed pretty easy for me to score it. I had this 114, 111 Juan Manuel Marquez. So if you break that down, that's a 9-3 Juan Manuel Marquez. The close rounds I had, which are close rounds, but I stand by them for what they are. I would just say these are the close ones, but I wouldn't say they go either way for me, at least. Would be 2, 8, 9, 10, and 12. And then I gave Pacquiao rounds 1, 10, and 12, and I gave Juan Manuel 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11. And the reason I did that was, it was pretty simple for me, is that I just think even from the first round of their first fight, Juan Manuel Marquez had Manny Pacquiao's timing down. Like a few times he missed slightly and landed one, even in the first round of the knockout punch he had in the fourth round, where he gets totally on the outside of Pacquiao and then throws that right hand, and Pacquiao's just wide open with his feet together. And I just think Marquez is timing with his uppercuts, the right hand to the body. He was just doing that his little like left hook or that wide right hook to the body, and then he would go with that uppercut, that left uppercut, and then the right hand right after. And I think Manny Pacquiao was getting a lot of credit from the commentators. I mean, he was landing, but I think, in my opinion, it looked like a lot of his right hands were falling short, and then he would sort of just fall in, like sort of like when you saw when Marquez was hurt in the sixth round in their fourth fight. He was just falling in and just throwing, and then even Emmanuel Stewart made a comment. A few times in the fight, it's like Manny Pacquiao's so athletic, but if you see what he's doing, is a lot of movement, but it's wasted movement because he's not actually boxing. He's just moving around, but he's not really doing anything. He said it looks like he's boxing, but just moving, not boxing and not jabbing. And then you could see that later in his career, Manny didn't have as much head movement, but it was more effective. That put him in place to effectively counter. And then the funny thing was also is that throughout the fight, the commentators were saying how Marquez was the aggressor and pushing Manny Pacquiao back. And then you hear Freddie Roach saying throughout the fight, we need to push him back. We can't be going back. We can't get up on the ropes and those types of things. But then at the same time, they're acting like Manny Pacquiao is the aggressor, and like I didn't keep track of what the commentators were saying, but it's like Emmanuel Stewart and Jim Lampley were like, Marquez probably won that round. Marquez probably won that round, but then Letterman, like No Paul said, in the 10th, having it 96-91 for Pacquiao. I think that's pretty outrageous. And Letterman gave Pacquiao rounds 1 through 2 at that point, and then 7 through 10. I think that's outrageous because I had the fight. I mean, I had the fight even after 5, and I just think Manny Pacquiao, he was gassing, he was just totally just leaning up against the turnbuckle, and then he was like towards the end of the fight, he was praying in the corner, and because he was done. And Marquez definitely I think really finished strong, and I think he deserved this fight. And I don't think it was definitely a classic fight, but just because a classic fight, I don't think on the scorecards it was close necessarily. It was close because Manny Pacquiao had. If Manny Pacquiao would have got one knockdown, this would be a whitewash. But I think sometimes when like people look back on it, opposed to actually sitting down and scoring it, I think sometimes they just remember what's on like the what would be on the highlight reel, and then it's sort of like Juan Manuel going back. And then they even started the rhetoric of at this point of Juan Manuel like not finishing the fight strong, which you saw all over the third fight, where you see them just saying, "Well, Nacho told him to not go after it." It's like, well, I think that was clear based on what we did, what we when we rescored the third fight as well. So that's sort of just my take on it.
Okay, so pretty clear in your mind. So do you classify it as a robbery?
I would say so. I mean, I think it was clear that Juan Manuel Marquez won just when you look at the scorecards. I mean, I didn't total it to the end of the fight, and I was pretty shocked at what I got. And I think, I mean, we'll get to the second one too, but I think Marquez did a better job here. And I would dare to say that he did a better job in this fight. Granted, he didn't get knocked down 3 times. He did a better job here of actually landing just consistent body punches and in combination than he did in the third fight.
Hey man, great points, dude. And that's the other thing. Like, I don't want to discount how good Marquez is. Like I said, I
Right.
easily could have scored it for Marquez. By round 5, I felt like Marquez was getting very comfortable with Pacquiao's rhythm. Also, Marquez was just some great stiff shots. He had landed some beautiful shots. And it's interesting, you could hear Freddie Roach pretty much give the same advice in both fights. Actually, you could probably hear him give the same advice in all the fights. You got to keep going forward, push this dude back, go in, but it's not so easy to go in on Juan Manuel Marquez, and Marquez is so good at just standing his ground comfortably, and although I think Pacquiao made a good account of himself, and I don't know, man, like this is a classic style mashup and a classic rivalry. And then Sean Gringo Hicks, he's giving me his notes. He says that he had Marquez winning 7-5. Now I'm going to need some clarification. I'm just realizing that I don't know if he's saying that Marquez is winning because of that, because I don't know if he counted the knockdowns when he says 7-5. So we'll have to get some clarification. So as of right now, it could be a robbery, but we're going to need some classification from Sean and see what he thinks. But technically, from what I know about him on the Gringo meter, I don't think this will be classified as a robbery. But I mean, this was a great breakdown. Wonderful fight to go back and watch. If you guys haven't seen it, man, right now things are slow. And like, if you could get into just enjoying fights and scoring them, man, like you're going to have one hell of a time. I'm telling you. So, dude, let's get into the second one, dude. Juan Manuel Marquez versus Manny Pacquiao, number 2. This was one hell of a fight as well. So, run, PMC, please take it away.
Yes, sir. So This fight took place also in Las Vegas, but at the Mandalay Bay Event Center, and it was on March 15th. You see on the poster, 2008. So a little under 4 years had passed since this point, and it was on HBO pay-per-view. This time, Juan Manuel was with Zanfer and Golden Boy, and then it seemed like Manny Pacquiao at this point had split from Murad Muhammad and was exclusively with Top Rank. But it's interesting when you see how both of these guys' careers went after um, their first fight. I mean, Manny Pacquiao really at this point on the precipice of superstardom. That hadn't happened yet, in my opinion, because he hadn't fought Oscar De La Hoya or and Ricky Hatton, and those are really just iconic moments for Manny Pacquiao. But this was for Juan Manuel Marquez. It's actually his second defense of the WBC 130 belt that he won the previous year against Marco Antonio Barrera, and that belt was won from Eric Morales when Barrera beat him in their third fight, which we said was the fight of the year in 2004. Uh, so in between their first fight, Manny Pacquiao went up to 130 and defeated Eric Morales, Oris Solis, and Marco Antonio Barrera again leading into this fight, and then uh, Juan Manuel Marquez really he fought some guys, but he beat Marco Antonio Barrera, Rocky Wars, Victor Polo, and then he lost to Chris John, which I know Chicano was watching him or watching that fight between this show and the previous show, and it was definitely as a controversial fight, but he still did lose. We have to go with what the record says, but this is the point that I want to make, which is an interesting point when I think about it. Is when a lot of people, I forgot where I heard this first, but then I looked at it and I'm like, you could look at it in this way, but some pundits look at Juan Manuel Marquez's career, even though it's littered with Hall of Famers, future Hall of Famers, and very good names at the time. People viewed it as Juan Manuel really chasing Manny Pacquiao and not really fighting. I mean, in comparison to Manny Pacquiao's resume, not fighting the top of the top in between his fights with Manny Pacquiao. I mean, you could say like he had great fights with David Diaz before David Diaz and then Michael Casitas, but in no way are those guys, or not David Diaz, excuse me, Juan Diaz, Baby Bull Diaz, and in no, before the third fight of Juan Manuel Marquez and Manny Pacquiao. But in no way would people consider that to be those to be Hall of Famers. There were good fights at the time and definitely action packed fights. You haven't seen those fights, but we don't really see that. And then we have Manny Pacquiao on the other hand, knocking Ricky Hatton out, beating Oscar De La Hoya, beating Miguel Cotto, Margarito, like all these names. But you have Juan Manuel Marquez, who was constantly really chasing Manny Pacquiao, and then it's really just sort of poetic or like the perfect ending for Juan Manuel Marquez in their fourth fight. I think he got robbed in the third fight, but in their fourth fight, knocking Manny Pacquiao out with, like I said, the punch that he was already timing in their first round of their first fight. So definitely is a great ending for him, and that's why Manuel Marquez, he was so staunch in not having the fifth fight unless it was something crazy. I think it was over $50 million. So it's just an interesting thing for me to see. But moving on, just with more context, this was also a fight of the year candidate, but Israel Vasquez versus Rafael Marquez, Juan Manuel Marquez's brother. Their third fight won. If anyone's seen that fight, you know it's a hellacious fight, and really, it's really sad. Like a fight that, at least for Israel Vasquez, probably damaged him, and is really probably a little impacting his life, which is sad to see. The WBA champion, there was no super champion at the time, but the WBA had Edwin Valero as their champion. Rest in peace to Edwin Valero, but one of the probably most explosive fighters I've witnessed and got to watch his fights on YouTube and live, not live in person, but on TV. And then the IBF champion was the South African Cassius Bula, Balui. He was trained by the same trainer that trained Hasim Rahman for his first fight against Lennox Lewis. And then the WBO had Joan Guzman as their champion at the time. So definitely two guys that, if people want to be critical of Manny Pacquiao's career, guys that he didn't fight, being Edwin Valero and Joan Guzman, that a lot of people at the time thought would give him a great fight. And I tend to agree with those people. I mean, Edwin Valero and Manny Pacquiao would have been two lefties and would just been a hellacious matchup just with their styles and their punching power. But yeah, so that's all the context I have. But how'd you all have it scored this second fight?
You go ahead, Nopal.
Oh man, this fight I had it scored 115 to 112. Manuel Marquez. I think it started off very competitive. Round one, and 2, I think there were like swing rounds. I gave them both to Marquez. Then round 3, of course, Manny Pacquiao comes out with the knockdown, knocks Juan Manuel Marquez down. I think this was when I think this. I'm not sure. I think Juan Manuel Marquez had his nose broken in this one, and he was dazed for a couple rounds. So from round 1 and 2, I gave him the Marquez. Rounds 3, 4, and 5, I gave those to Pacquiao. You know, and then I round 6, I think that Marquez came back and won 6 and 7, 8, 9, and then there was pretty good action leading up, and then I think round 10, Pacquiao starts off strong, even manages to clip Marquez and kind of hurt him, but uh, then Marquez evens it out, but I still managed to give that to Pacquiao. Then round 11 and 12, I thought Marquez edged those, so I scored the fight 115, 112, Marquez.
All right, very good, man. Thank you so much. And Run, that was a great breakdown too, man. And Run PMC, like, what you think, man? I feel bad you're always going last, and I want to know what you think, bro. Like, how'd you see this fight?
It definitely was a slightly different, at least to start out the fight stylistically. Manny Pacquiao, you could tell, and they were talking about it, was a little tamer and had done a good amount of work on his right hand, that right hook. Emmanuel Stewart did touch on it a few times that he sort of loads up with it, or I think he said winds it up, which is what you could see. But just with the blistering hand speed that Manny Pacquiao has, he sort of freezes guys when he's about to throw, and they might get caught between their steps on their footwork. So, but he definitely looked a lot tamer, and that is when he wasn't as wild, he definitely could land a little bit more. But to break it down, I had this pretty similar to the last fight. I mean, I just think Manny Pacquiao, he had his spots, but I think Juan Mil Marquez, I had it 116, 111. That's that being the difference because that knockdown. But I had a Juan Mil Marquez winning. With like no Paul, I had Marquez winning the first 2 rounds, 10-9. Um, the first 2 rounds, I would say, would be probably swing rounds, like true swing rounds for me, just because I think it was a pretty even round up until the for the first round, but then Marquez had the biggest punch in the round. But I can see that going to Manny Pacquiao very easily. And then in the second round, that's when Marquez landed that combination where he lands with the left hook and stuns Manny Pacquiao. I gave Marquez that round, but I also marked it a true swing round. And then the third round, I had Marquez winning the round up until the knockdown. But in my opinion, this was the hardest knockdown that Manny Pacquiao landed out of the 5 he had in their whole trilogy. He was just Marquez was really out of it. I think the first 3 were solid knockdowns. In the first fight, in the fourth fight, I mean, it was a knockdown, but it was more a timing shot, and then Marquez was ready to go right after that, hurting Pacquiao. But and then after that, fourth, I gave to Manny. Uh, Fifth and sixth, I gave to Marquez. 7, Marquez, but that's another close round. 8, I gave to Marquez. 9, I gave to Marquez, close round. Manny got the 10th. And then Marquez finished off with the 11th, 12th winning. And I found it odd because I think Marquez closed really strong, especially how they're saying he wants them to close. And they gave it to, or at least Letterman gave it to Manny Pacquiao. So um, I had 4 close rounds, those being 1, 2, with those being true swing rounds for me, and then 7 and 9 being close. But I want to stand by giving them to Juan Manuel Marquez, and I gave Pacquiao the third, fourth, 10th, and then Marquez the rest of the rounds. And I just think one thing I want to touch on is I think Letterman was pretty horrendous in both these fights in his scoring, because at times he would just be like, they'd go to him between rounds or the start of the next round, and he said, "Well, I just like Manny Pacquiao's style better. That's why I gave him the round. I just like the way his right hand looks." I'm like, I didn't remember seeing that in the scoring criteria. You just like the style better. I mean, that's a loaded statement, but I don't think that's part of the scoring criteria. And I just think Juan Manuel Marquez just continue to have Manny Pacquiao's number. I think this fight is more competitive. I had more close rounds for this, but I think Juan Manuel Marquez won this one again.
All right. Thank you, Run. Did you classify this one as a robbery?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call this one a robbery. I just think it was more competitive than the first one. I think Marquez just had his number, and I wouldn't consider this one a robbery. No.
All right. Thank you, Run PMC. And then Sean Gringo Hicks scored this one for us as well, and he had Marquez winning this one 8-4. So we're going to get his classification on whether this one would be a robbery, but Run PMC is less inclined to think so. So it's going to be a sweep that this fight was not a robbery. I had Pacquiao beating Marquez 114-113. I feel weird being this guy who just keeps having Pacquiao win. I can say that I had Marquez clearly winning the third fight, but for the first and this second one, I had Pacquiao winning, and it is what it is. But could have seen it the other way as well. Like, in that first round, I was able to notice right away from just watching all those fights, including all like the Pacquiao fights, including the Marquez fights, like in between, in the lead up to their second one. Like, Pacquiao and Marquez both had improvements. Pacquiao had some improvements from the first fight that are evident. Like, I think he's more conservative with his head movement. He's also got some awesome hand speed still, right? But he's a better counter puncher. He knows how to counter on the way out with a beautiful left. It's something that I saw him develop in those Morales fights. And he also knows how to use patience. But one of the things that I noticed is that Marquez was able to really neutralize some of the improvements that Pacquiao had made. I had noticed that counter left on the way out. Like, he wasn't really able to do it as much with Marquez pretty quickly. Also, Pacquiao was starting to toy with, hitting hitting Marquez with a jab and a cross to the body. And I thought, wow, that's pretty sweet. But I mean, it ended very shortly. Marquez took that away. So, I mean, Marquez was great. He definitely won the second round, in my opinion. But in the third, we all had that being a 10-8 round. And then, in the fourth, I felt that Pacquiao won the round, but, it easily could have been a Marquez round. I had that as a swing round. And then round 5, I had for Marquez. And I said Pacquiao might have lost the round by taking the first half off. And then in round 6, Marquez clearly won that round. And I felt that Pacquiao was just waiting way too much. And then I had round 7 as a swing round. But I did give it to Pacquiao, and I said that Pac won the round, but Marquez benefits when the fight is at this pace. That's the other thing too. Like, and you see this with their whole rivalry. Part of it's about Marquez being patient, but in this particular one, I felt like Pacquiao could have afforded to kind of press on the gas a little bit more, and you can hear that from Freddie Roach saying, "Hey, man, you got to take it to him. You got to go in there. Don't wait. What are you waiting for?" But that pace benefited Marquez, and I could see why Pacquiao didn't want to go in, and it's like, I feel like, in this rivalry, like the pressure's always on Pacquiao to kind of make the fight. Like, I think maybe he wouldn't mind having somebody kind of lunge in at him, but Marquez is just too smart for that. He's really, really good with range and spacing. And then I felt that round 8 went to Marquez. So I agree with you guys. I actually agree with you guys on a lot of the rounds. And even the rounds that I give to Pacquiao, some of them I have are swings. So like, we don't see this fight too differently, but the scorecards are different. I had round 9 as a swing. Round 10, I said that, Pac with that stunning left early, that was cool, and he still connected with some beautiful shots. And I thought it was a good round for Pacquiao. So, I gave it to Pacquiao. Round 11, I had as a swing round, but I gave it to Pacquiao. And then round 12, I gave it to Marquez. But I easily could have had this fight flipped the other way for Marquez. I had two swing rounds that could have easily gone to Marquez. That would have put Marquez over the top. So if I had watched it on another night, I easily could have had Marquez winning this fight. But on that particular night, with with how I was watching it, man, I had Pacquiao winning this fight. So we can open it up a little bit, man. Let's talk about these fights and in general, their rivalry. Like, what are your overall thoughts about this great epic rivalry that, if you haven't checked it out, if you're kind of new to boxing, you just don't happen to know about Pacquiao versus Marquez, and do yourself a favor and check it out. Like, what, you guys have any like overall thoughts about their whole rivalry?
I mean, definitely iconic rivalry among like guys that you consider in the lower weight classes. I mean, this if you're new to boxing, I would say definitely watch this, like these 4 fights, and then definitely watch Eric Morales versus Marco Antonio Barrera. Those would be the first 2 I would start with, and besides starting with some like classic heavyweight fights. But I mean, it was a great rivalry, and then I'm glad that it. I mean, with Marquez, it was definitely an iconic way to end it. There's no way that I would have want. I mean, I would want to see a 5th fight, but if it ends the way it ends, that's very storybook. It would be like, at least for like, if Michael Jordan wouldn't have come back for the Wizards and he knocks out, or he just ends it in the, I think that was '98 in the finals. I mean, I'm not saying Juan Marquez is the Michael Jordan of boxing, but I would just say like just iconic moments in boxing, and you could see the growth between them. They're both at almost or over 20 pounds of when they started the rivalry, 20 pounds heavier, and you could see just the class of boxer both those guys were, with to being able to compete at 147, a weight class that truly wasn't theirs, really late in their boxing careers. You just see the class of what they are and their how skilled they were. Like Marquez coming off, Marquez being able to hang with, even though I think Bradley clearly won the fight, with a very athletic Tim Bradley, who at the point, and I think that was probably Bradley's one of his best performances, to be able to hang with a guy like that at a in his second to last fight, because I think he just fought Ruslan Provodnikov after that. It really just tells. And then Manny Pacquiao, I mean, um, beating Keith Thurman, competing with Ugas, and then just really what he did late in his career. I think it's a very, very impressive and just speaks of their class.
Definitely. You got anything on that note, Paul?
Yeah. I wanted to go back to a point that Run made about, some of the fans thinking that, the contrast between the two careers, Juan Manuel Marquez and Pacquiao. I think initially, Marquez always complained that the Barreras and the Eric Moraleses wouldn't let him get into the Mexican, you know, that elite Mexican class of fights. They had their trilogy, but he wanted to get on the action and fight both of those guys. And he was never able to get that Eric Morales fight, and he was able to eventually get the Barrera fight, but he wanted those fights. So when this is one of the reasons, when he looks at another fighter, sometimes he doesn't always respect their careers, because he feels like he was held back. He wasn't given the fights that he wanted. He actually, I believe, he lost his first debut fight. Like, he wasn't done any favors. And eventually, I mean, when you go into the Pacquiao fight, it looks like, like in my opinion, he looks like he looked like the type of fighter that when he's fighting the fight, he's kind of mentally scoring the fight almost at the same time. He's kind of like, if the guy hits him, if Pacquiao hit him, he try to come back. And it's interesting, because after the fight, he always swear that he lost these fights, and we finally rescored him, and we saw that he has a valid point, that he got robbed. He wasn't given he wasn't done any favors. Also, I wanted to say that good of him to eventually put a fucking check mark behind that Pacquiao rivalry, and proving to the world that he beat, that he's better than Pacquiao. Pacquiao might have been all around better than Juan Manuel Marquez, maybe. Like I said, he was given the opportunity Pacquiao was given lots of opportunities that Marquez wasn't. Part of it is because, maybe Pacquiao tried to do certain things that Marquez didn't. Marquez also has to be open-minded and know that, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. Maybe Pacquiao did some things that Marquez didn't want to do. You know what I mean? Maybe he went out of his way and maybe he had a bigger following than Marquez. So, there's a lot of things to consider. One thing I will tell the audience is, once you start off with the 24/7 thing, or the little documentaries that I think Run PMC sent us, that'll get you going, man. You'll have to score one after another. It's like a marathon of these fights, and it's, beautiful history.
It is beautiful history, man. And before, I started live streaming and even talking, Juan Manuel Marquez kind of quietly retired. It's kind of like, was he going to fight? Then he decided not to. And then, a couple fights didn't pop off. So, I'm glad that we have a chance to kind of go back and appreciate Juan Manuel Marquez. And on top of that too, man, like, it's nice to go back and appreciate Pacquiao. Like, they're both greats. One of the other things that I forgot to mention was that I think Pacquiao's defense improved in that second fight too. Like, he was really good at kind of, although sometimes he would stand his ground. I mean, that's what makes him an aggressor, but he was really good at kind of like moving back very quickly with his great footwork and kind of just throwing up his hands to kind of block shots. And it was pretty effective at times, So I think in that sense, Pacquiao also dictated the pace. They both set the pace together in these fights. And one of the other things I want to say too is, like, this just shows you, that the losses don't make a fighter. Like, in between these fights, Marquez suffered a loss. I classified the Chris John fight as a robbery. I also thought those low blows, especially when you look at Chris John's belt line, like, I went back and I watched that fight. It was kind of painful. I wouldn't recommend it. I'm not going to make the Al Chile crew go back and actually score that one, but I had that one 116 to 110 for Marquez. And I could see why Marquez ended up changing his style a little bit. Like he was more aggressive. Also, Marquez has an excellent lead left hand. Also, so good at his feints, good at adjustments, good at taking away certain tools, certain offensive tools that his opponent has. But he waits on people a lot, and sometimes it can make for an ugly fight, or sometimes, he's okay with that pressure building on the opponent to make something happen. And it did cost him, if you ask me, like Marquez did get some raw deals in his career. I went back and I looked at the Marquez versus Norwood fight. Like I had that fight a draw. Like I don't necessarily think that was a robbery. I mean, Marquez thinks he's always gets robbed. He thought he got robbed against Bradley. He's kind of a guy who, feels very strongly about the way he does. And he's not necessarily always friendly to his opponents afterwards with his comments, but I do think it was nice of Pacquiao to give Marquez that fourth fight. He certainly didn't need to take that fourth fight. And maybe we could go back and explore like why he took that fourth fight. Maybe there were some good reasons as far as like, opposition available, but Pacquiao was an all-time great. Of the two, even though Marquez won the rivalry, and I'd have to say that Manny Pacquiao is the greater of the two. And like I said, man, losses don't define a fighter. We are better for having both these guys in there. We're better for having multiple opponents. Like we're excuse me. What I'm trying to say is like we benefit from having these two both have mutual opponents that they fought. So it's nice to go back and see how they both handled Barrera. See how they both got beat by Floyd. But it is interesting to kind of and the Bradley fight as well. Like it's interesting to see the dynamics of these fights. Just a great history of boxing. Like I would love it if we were just kind of currently living in an era like that. Like I would love to have 230 pounders like Pacquiao and Juan Manuel Marquez in this particular era. Like, I mean, it would just be amazing. You know what I mean?
I wanted to add, one thing about Juan Manuel Marquez that I really appreciated, man, and he didn't really even need to do this, but I mean, you can see he's got his nose broken, bleeding all into the mouth, stuff like that, and can barely breathe, and the dude won't even clinch. For I think it was round two. He after he got clipped that one time. I mean, fight two when he got KD knocked down on round three. I mean, he was hurt for like those 3 rounds straight. He was still recovering from that. But the dude didn't clinch. He's moving his head, trying to not get hit anymore. And, I think that that's a cool thing, because he could have just probably clinched a little bit and survived the round. But this dude, he's fighting through some big punches,
Oh, definitely. And especially in that fourth fight, like, he's just, he's pure chingon, I mean, they both are really, in that fight. I think in the third fight, you could see Pacquiao going in when he doesn't want to, and he gets pieced up and, and afterwards, like he'll make the sign of the cross going like, man, he's just really putting himself on the line, dude. And, he's making the punch worse for himself the way he comes in. Like it was a total risk, but he had to make things happen. Just a great rivalry, man. Does anybody have any
great point, Chicano? I mean, it's like Marquez is just there sitting, waiting for Pacquiao. Pacquiao keeps coming in. I mean, that's the thing we got to appreciate about Pacquiao. He doesn't have the ideal dimensions. We know his arms are really short, and he has to get up all in there to get, and I can see that's probably why you're giving him some of the rounds, because he's got to do a lot more effort sometimes to win fights, We could see with the Ugas fight. I mean, he's coming in, getting nailed with nothing but jabs the whole fight, still coming in, and, it's a thing you got to appreciate about Pacquiao.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you could see him, Juan Manuel Marquez, exercise just great patience in that third one. But you could also see Marquez standing his ground a lot more in that fight. Not as much on this one. Like he was kind of more back foot centric in the second fight. So like I think that Marquez got better as the fights went by, as far as like the way he approached Pacquiao. And then also in that fourth fight, maybe Pacquiao slowed down a little bit more, but he also decided to take it to Marquez, and he ultimately paid the price. And with that perfect punch, he got knocked out, lights out, Yeah.
And I wanted to add one more thing about Marquez is like, you get a sense that, given a rematch, he could do a lot better always versus opponents. And unluckily for him, that Tim Bradley fight, he was just too old, for the rematch after that. But you get a sense that he could have done a lot better in the rematch, As far as rematch with Floyd, I don't think, there was just Floyd's natural gifts were just too much, and And apart from that, I mean, the size difference or whatever. I think, weight wise and all that, I think Marquez was even lighter than Pacquiao, maybe a pound or two, you know, even though Pacquiao might have looked smaller. I don't know, you know.
Yeah, in the third or fourth fight, I don't remember, but at least at the weigh-in, he was lighter than Manny Pacquiao by a pound or two.
Oh yeah. And speaking of poundage, man, like, you know, when they're assessing these fighters, like in real time, when you're listening to the commentary, they talk about how, oh, these guys might be, especially if you go back and watch all their fights with Brer Morales, like, oh, they might be new to 130. Like, like Pacquiao was considered kind of smaller for 130 back in the day. It's amazing that these guys, starting where they did, made their way up to 130, 135, 147. I mean, and Pacquiao even went up a little bit higher. Like, it's really quite amazing. Like, I don't think that we'll see anything like that for a while, at least not to the point where the person who does that has that type of success. I mean, it's really quite impressive, and you don't see it that often.
Yeah, I think Marquez was the last thing I heard about Marquez. I don't know if you guys remember, but he was looking to fight Cotto. I think they were looking to. Marquez wanted like a 150-pound catch weight, but it was never able to, go all the way. I think Marquez was trying to get back in the gym and see. He was always saying, depending on how my body feels, I'm going to do this, but it didn't happen. Obviously, Marquez is probably too old to take on a competitive fight, you know?
Right. I remember that they were both talking and they tried to agree on a catch weight and they both just walked away from the fight. And then Marquez quietly retired and they're both stubborn, like Cotto's walked away from negotiations before. And so has Pacquiao, historical precedent. So it doesn't surprise me that that fight didn't go off. I was hoping that fight would go off because I thought that Marquez would win. Off the top of your head, how do you guys think that one would have played out?
Um, I don't remember. Were these negotiations before Cotto fought Saddam Ali?
No, I
Yes.
think it was after,
It was
wasn't it?
after.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still hard to tell because Marquez hadn't fought since he fought Alvarado, which was like I think it was like 2014. So it's just at that point it was probably like 2017, 2018. It's so hard to tell. And could Cotto even make 150? Because he fought at 154, 160 after, or not 160, 155 or whatever he was fighting for that. So if he could have made it, I mean, I would have probably favored Cotto, but Cotto's punch resistance was really gone at that point. Getting hurt by a guy that's not a puncher and Saddam Ali multiple times, and that's coming up to 154 from 147, that's pretty suspect to me. So I don't know. I probably lean Cotto, but I really couldn't call that.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't even think Cotto could have made 150. I think that's
No way.
probably why
Yeah.
nobody took this fight serious, because Cotto was already comfortable at the weights that he chose, and he found that little niche where, hey, bro, I don't gotta fight at 147 ever again, Not to mention they always said that he didn't like to do road work, go jogging or running. That was one of his things, and that was I heard that was the first question that he asked Freddie Roach, are you gonna make me run? And that was a requirement for him to train with Freddie Roach, because his last coach wanted him to run. He didn't want to run anymore. So I don't know, but that was probably the sticking point is the weight. No way Cotto would have agreed to fight at anything lower than 154, in my opinion. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I always wonder. I mean, I've always wondered this is because Cotto was with Pedro Diaz for a decent amount of time, and then Pedro Diaz is like he's a doctor, and then they do like these talks about how he does this like scientific weight cut and everything. I wondered if that damaged Cotto's punch resistance because Cotto's pretty big, and then cutting down in weight, and you see him at weigh-ins, he looks pretty bone dry. But then also like guys that he's also had that have been big guys, that being Pedro Diaz, like I mean, we all saw what happened to Pritchard Cologne. Obviously, those were rabbit punches, but Pritchard Cologne was pretty big for the weight class as well, or weight drained a ton, and he was with Pedro Diaz as well. And then also Ivan Baranchek, pretty big. He was pretty big for the Zepeda fight, and then he would get down, and I don't know how he even fights at 140. And then his punch resistance was sort of iffy too. So I wonder if somehow if those things with like because we know like the when you cut weight like you lose the fluid around the brain. I wonder if that affects all three of those guys punch resistance. And I think Cotto, at least later in his career, you saw it really dwindling away. But that just might be from Cotto's style and just from years and years of boxing.
And so, for reference, just to answer your question, this fight would have been at 150 pounds if they agreed to it, and because Miguel Cotto wouldn't go lower, Marquez wanted 147, and these negotiations were in 2016, right after Cotto fought Canelo. So that's what was going on at the time.
I favor Miguel Cotto then.
Damn, that would have. So Miguel Cotto was accepting the 150, Chicano.
Yeah, dude, which I think is pretty fair. I mean, it's not that much more, you know what I mean? And although I never thought Cotto was that big in general, and like Run PMC was saying, he fought in that 155-pound weight class. But I don't know. I mean, I always thought he was kind of small in general, and he came from a lower weight class too. Like, I forget where he started. I don't know if it was it 135 or 140 that he started? I don't remember. But I
thought
mean,
he started at 140.
he might have started at 140. Yeah. So, I mean, it's all right. I mean, it didn't happen, you know, so it is what it is. I mean, there's lots of fights that we don't get, but that was something I would have looked forward to. But hey, man, let's wrap this one up, and then, dude, let's go into our next topic, which is choosing our next controversial rescore. And Run PMC, you've done such a great job of breaking down all these fights, man. We're gonna leave it to you to pick this next one. If you have anything off the top of your head, you can let me know, or I can read off the list again, and you can tell me what you think.
Yeah, let's go to the list. I don't have any that I'm really thinking about right now.
All right, man, let's do it. Here's the list of controversial fights that I've acquired over research. Here we go. Sergio Martinez versus Kermit Cintron. Pernell Whitaker versus Jose Luis Ramirez. De La Hoya versus Sturm. James Toney versus Dave DeBerry. Pacquiao versus Horn. Lupe Pintor versus Carlos Zarate. Joel Casamayor versus Jose Armando Santa Cruz. Foreman versus Briggs. Sergio Martinez versus Martin Murray. Ryota Murata versus Hassan Nadam. Ali versus Norton 3. And Ali versus Jimmy Young.
Let's go with Casamayor and Leo Santa Cruz's older brother.
All right, dude. I'm looking forward to that one, dude. I heard that one is a blatant robbery. Have you seen it, Run?
Forgot what undercard they're on, but they were on the undercard of a fight we rescored. I forgot which one it was though, but I didn't get to watch it. I just watched like the last 2 rounds, and it seemed like everyone had, at least the commentators had Santa Cruz winning. So, but I forgot what undercard that was on though. But yeah, it was definitely on because I watched the full rebroadcast that they posted on YouTube, and it was I think it was the opening fight of the 3 fights for one of the fights we rescored.
Cool, man. Looking forward to it. All right. Well, for the Al Chile crew, this is Chicano Prophet signing off. Y'all have a great one. Thanks for joining us. Peace.